Hi, I'm Angelo the BA, and this is going to be me taking a stab at Indeed's top 10 business analyst interview questions. I decided to not prep for these questions, kind of answer them raw. If I was actually getting ready to do interviews and applying to places, I would probably research a little bit. The most important thing to do before you kind of go into the interview phase and prep yourself to be asked these questions is to kind of go through all the projects that you've been a part of, highlight the different things in your own mind, because you can't really anticipate 100% what questions you might be asked. But the better you remember everything about essentially everything you've done, all the struggles you went through, all the wins that you've had, when you get asked those questions, you'll be able to pick right away from those projects. So I apologize in advance if I take a little longer thinking about some things, because like I said, I didn't really prep for it. I just thought it would be kind of fun to see how I might answer some of these questions. Question number one. As a business analyst, you have to work with all types of different positions throughout a company. How do you deal with difficult stakeholders? That's a good question. In my mind, I don't really feel that stakeholders are necessarily difficult. It's just that stakeholders have a job that they have to get done, and they have their own constraints, their own pressures. And because of that, they might come at you with some intensity or some aggression, but it's really because they're probably feeling a lot of pressure from their own position to get things done. So typically, regardless of the stakeholder, my main goal is to understand what it is that their job is, what it is that they need, what information they need to essentially do their job, and then try to provide that information for them in a way that works for them with as little friction as possible. And if you do that over and over, difficult stakeholders suddenly become allies. They're nicer to you. They trust you. They come to you and they need things because they know that you'll give them exactly what they need. A client has a Christmas themed e-commerce shop that sells 5 items. What are some potential problems you foresee with their revenue streams? This is an interesting one, and I'm not sure this would work really for anybody in all BA roles, but immediately that it's Christmas themed, which is seasonal, meaning there's going to be a window from Thanksgiving to Christmas where they're going to be making a ton of revenue, and then they're going to essentially die off for 10 months until that season kind of comes on again. So that's the first and most immediate problem I see with their revenue stream. Potentially supply chain as well. If other suppliers are not supplying those Christmas themed things all year round, it might be hard for them to get things in their store outside of that Christmas season. But again, I doubt they're going to be making much revenue outside of that Christmas window, and that's really going to be the biggest problem. And if anything, they should probably expand their business to be not just Christmas themed, but just to be holiday themed and to kind of pinpoint the different seasons so they can have consistent revenue and survive for more than 1 year, or one season rather. Question number 3. Are you familiar with SQL queries? What are the different parts of an SQL statement? Honestly, I don't use SQL a lot in my day-to-day job. I'm familiar at a high level with simple SQL statements where you're kind of dictating an action, what you want to happen, where that information is coming from, and then kind of the qualifiers of that information. But beyond that, I'm not super well versed in SQL, and it's something that I don't use in my day-to-day job very often. Question number 4. In your experience as a business analyst, what is the most important aspect of analytical reporting? Well, to me, the most important aspect of anything that you do as a business analyst is that it's providing value, or its intended value. If you're creating a report and sending it to somebody, is it meaningful to them? Is it actionable? Can they make a decision based off of that? To me, that's the most important thing about anything you produce as a business analyst, is that can somebody use it to make a better decision, do their job, or move forward with the project. And so to me, the most important thing is that that report provides value. Question number 5. Can you describe a time when you had to steer a client toward a different course of action than the one they were set on taking? Yes, this can happen all the time. Usually it happens when you have a new product owner or a new stakeholder who doesn't really know the ins and outs of why things are the way that they are. In my case, in the application that I was a part of, there was a particular feature that was on the page that when you look at it immediately, it feels like extraneous. It feels like it doesn't really need to be there. And we were trying to kind of clean up our interface. So our stakeholder, our product owner actually, said, why don't we just get rid of it? It'll make things neater. It'll make things cleaner. And to me, if anything exists, that means somebody wanted it at some time or at some point in time. So I did my research on what that feature was, who the intended stakeholders of that feature were, and how they use it. Do they still use it? And it turned out that it was something that was still in use. And while the group that was using it was small, it was very valuable to that group. So I informed him of that. And fortunately, this product owner likes to make good decisions. So they also just went to that group, talked to them, understood the need, and then that feature ended up sticking around. But that's how I would kind of sway a stakeholder, essentially with information and data to help them make the best decision possible. Question number 6. Name 3 types of diagrams or charts that business analysts use and explain why they are important. I would say the first one is a concept model. This is for a business analyst who's new in a domain or new on a project or an initiative, and it helps them learn the domain. And I don't just mean like mind mapping and drawing arrows. I mean a true concept model where you're dictating the relationships between different concepts, so you kind of understand how everything works together and intertwines, which allows you to ask better questions when you're eliciting requirements. Next is probably a process model. Pretty straightforward. If you're documenting something that's going to be changing a process, you need to understand the ins and outs of that process, and also get your stakeholders to understand the ins and outs of that process. And I find a process model, even if you can't do it completely, helps elicit requirements when you're working with the stakeholders, so they can see the decisions that need to be made when things go one path or another, so they can give you the right information to make the best possible decisions about that flow. And then finally, I would say a data flow diagram. A data flow diagram is very similar to me in concept as a concept model, but it focuses obviously on the flow of data. So rather than concepts, you're seeing applications or processes or actors, and then how information flows across them. And this helps you see the impacts of changing different things in the space. So you understand, if I change this data will change here, which will impact this application, and that application. So it's a great way to kind of do an impact analysis of, okay, this thing is changing. Who do I need to go talk to make sure I don't break anything downstream? What tools do you think are the most important for a business analyst to do their job well? I would say number 1, a collaboration tool, a good collaboration tool. I mean, email is kind of like the lowest level of that. A good tool like Jira or Confluence, where people can work together, see what other people are doing, have that conversation in one place, and kind of keep it well documented in one place, would be the number 1 tool. That could exist in many forms. Even a cloud Word document or like a OneNote could suffice, as long as you stay organized. Next is a data manipulation tool, something like Excel or Tableau. Often you're working with a lot of data, and in order to make good decisions, you need to understand that data. So to be able to kind of extract, load, transform, manipulate, and analyze information will allow you to, 1, understand what's happening, and also help your stakeholders make the best decisions. And finally, diagramming software. And this could come in a lot of forms. You could make diagrams in PowerPoint if you had to, or a Visio, or a Lucidchart, or whatever it is. But some way you can make those visuals that make it easier for you to learn the domain, teach the domain, and make decisions about that domain. Number 8, how do you explain highly technical information to stakeholders and decision makers? This is communication 101. First, you got to understand who your stakeholders are and what information is relevant to them, and how they need to ingest that information for it to make sense for them. And then you modify your message to start from what they know, and then move it down into the information that they now need to know. This is how we all learn. It's easier for us to learn when we're starting with what we know, and then the new thing relates to what we already know. So I usually start out by learning a little bit about their background, their knowledge, their role, to understand what they know in their space, and then tailor my communication to like pinpoint it to things that they already know, so they can understand quickly and make decisions that make sense. Number 8, describe the concept of scope creep and explain how you prevent it from impacting your analysis. So scope creep is essentially when you agree upon essentially an MVP or a requirements package or whatever you want to call it, and then throughout the course of the work, things keep getting added on. In a waterfall environment, this is more detrimental, because usually in a waterfall environment, you commit to dates with the requirements up front. And so if later on those requirements expand, then those dates are now no longer valid, because you're probably going to go a little longer, or you need to take something out, whatever it may be. However, in Agile, scope creep is not really an issue. In Agile, we call scope creep just learning from what you've implemented and making new decisions for things that might be more important. So it's less of a hassle, really. And because Agile works in sprints, usually typically from 1 week to ideally no more than 3 weeks, you stick to your sprint, and then at the end of the sprint, if you want to do something different in that next sprint, you absolutely can. The process is built for it. It's built for learning. So I deal with scope creep by suggesting working in an agile environment. If we're in a waterfall environment, you deal with scope creep by reminding those creepers about what the dates are, what the goals of the project are. And if those things have to go in to meet the goals of the project, then you're talking about prioritizing or deprioritizing different requirements to make sure you still hit those dates or that you change those dates. So really it's about communication, staying informed, but not necessarily saying no, but how do we adjust to the new reality of what we've learned at this point. And finally, number 10, how do you reconcile conflicting data when researching a project? If I have conflicting data, that means somewhere along the data collection pipeline, there was a mismatch. So if person A is saying one thing, person B is saying another thing, then I'm going to go investigate both of those people, learn how they got to their conclusions to see where they might have gotten out of step. If it's data in one place versus data in another, it's kind of the same story. I'm trying to see how that data is being populated, where it's coming from, what transformations are happening, what processes are there, who's allowed to interact with it, so I could understand how these things could have been different, because different data is a problem. And understanding why it's different is half of the battle in getting to resolving what the problems might be. So that was me shotgunning through Indeed's top 10 business analyst interview questions. Obviously, my questions might be, or my answers might be different than your answers, because we're going to have different experiences. And I would also probably prep more if I was really going to be, going for an interview where I actually really want the job, with probably better examples, and maybe think through all the different points in my work experience to have more concrete and strong examples, because I'm sure they exist somewhere in there. And most importantly, educate yourself on what is most important as a business analyst in terms of competencies and in terms of the value that you bring to a project. This is going to help you kind of tailor your answers to make sure you're really addressing what your interviewer is trying to ask. If you're unclear on that, I have a course available on Teachable right now, and I'll leave a link in the description. Or in addition to that, if you're interested in SQL, which I don't cover in my training, there's a great course on SQL at learnsql.com, and I'll include a link to that in the description as well. And if you have any additional questions about business analysis in general, your resume, whatever, let me know in the comments, and I'll either answer you there or create a whole new video to answer your questions. So subscribe to see your questions get answered, and thanks for watching.